The Senate adjourned Saturday afternoon and is not due to meet again until Thursday. Meanwhile, House Freedom Caucus Chairman Mark Meadows, appearing exclusively on Sunday Morning Futures, says the sticking point for Democrats isn't so much about the wall, but rather not giving President Trump what he wants.
This is all about trying to make sure that Donald Trump does not secure the border. And it's really more out of their dislike for this president than really about the communities that they are really should be upholding to make sure that they're safe.
Ellison Barber joins us live from the White House with the very latest on the breaking news. Hello, Ellison.
Hi, Mike. Yeah, we just got this tweet from President Trump where he said that the Deputy Secretary of Defense, Patrick Shanahan, would become the acting Secretary of Defense starting January 1st. We were expecting General James Mattis to stay in his position as Secretary of Defense until February. Mattis, of course, resigned just a couple of days ago, saying that he felt that the president deserved to have a Secretary of Defense whose views were more aligned with his. And he cited some various things, including relationships with allies as a view that no longer aligned between himself and President Trump. Now we are learning that Mattis will be leaving early, and sources are telling Fox News that this is not General Mattis's decision, that he is being forced to leave early. This from our colleague Jennifer Griffin over at the Pentagon. She says that he's being forced to leave early because the president is aggravated with all of the positive press Mattis has received in recent days. She says that she has told Mattis wanted to stay until February 28th so that he could visit NATO one more time and ensure an orderly transition, and also testify on Capitol Hill about the budget. But again, she is told by sources that President Trump was incredibly annoyed by all of the Mattis coverage, and that is what prompted an acceleration of Mattis's departure. The person who is stepping in to replace him, Patrick Shanahan, worked for Boeing for about 30 years and has been Mattis's deputy. He's a favorite of the president, but according to Jennifer Griffin and her sources, he's not particularly viewed in the Pentagon as being a good manager. So a big change again from sources who have been speaking with Fox News. This is something that was not done at Mattis's request, but something that was forced and had to do with the president not being thrilled with a lot of the coverage that Mattis has been receiving over the past couple of days. Of course, all of this happening in the middle of a government shutdown and a lot of budget negotiations and back and forth. Two of the key negotiators on the budget from here at the White House are Vice President Mike Pence and Budget Director and incoming acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney. The pair have visited Capitol Hill at least twice since Friday. They were there again yesterday, meeting with Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer. Mulvaney says that they gave Schumer a counteroffer. The White House has not told us the details of that offer, but Mulvaney says it is less than the $5 billion the White House has been asking for border security and a physical barrier or a wall. The Democrats, Mulvaney says, are at $1.3 billion. The offer he and Pence made is somewhere between $1.3 billion and $5 billion.
The president tweeted out a picture yesterday of a steel fence, the steel slatted fence with a pointed top and so forth. That's what we want to build. In the Democrats' mind, that is not a wall. So they have offered us $1.3 billion to build the barrier that we want, but then they go on TV and say there's no money for a wall. So here's the problem, of course, is that as recently as 2 weeks ago, they had offered us $1.6 billion for that same thing. So they're moving in the wrong direction. I think there's a really good question here as to whether or not this deal can be cut before the new Congress comes in. I think there's an implication here for Nancy Pelosi's election for the speakership. I think she's now in that unfortunate position of being beholden to her left wing, to where she cannot be seen as agreeing with the president on anything until after she's speaker. If that's the case, again, I think there's a chance we go into the next Congress.
The White House says what happens next is up to Senate Democrats. Mulvaney says the Senate adjourned right after he and Pence gave Senator Schumer the counteroffer. Of course, Mike, Democrats believe what happens next is really up to the White House here. They say that this is a shutdown that President Trump is responsible for. The White House changing their tune from what we heard a couple weeks ago, saying that this is the Democrats' fault. So no deal and also no agreement on who is to blame for where things are right now. Mike?
Ellison Barber leading us off on a very busy afternoon on the North Lawn. Ellison, many thanks. Arthel?
All right, Mike, thank you. And as the Democrats prepare to take control of the House next month, some Republicans believe it's now or never to secure funding for the wall. Here is Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer.
It will never pass the Senate. Not today, not next week, not next year. So, Mr. President, President Trump, if you want to open the government, you must abandon the wall. Plain and simple.
Republican Congressman from New York, Lee Zeldin, joins us now with his take on the shutdown. Congressman, thank you for joining us here on this Sunday, busy Sunday morning now. Before we get to the shutdown, I want to start with your reaction first to President Trump's tweet announcing that Deputy Defense Secretary Patrick Shanahan will now become the acting defense secretary as of January 1st. And what does this mean for the transition?
Well, the good thing as far as the transition is that you're putting someone in place who is at the Pentagon, who knows all of the personnel, the current processes, doesn't come from the outside without a familiarity with the people and the policies. So I think it's going to be helpful from that standpoint that you have Patrick Shanahan already in that position. As far as timeline of when General Mattis, Secretary Mattis is going to leave, it's certainly within the president's prerogative in this situation to decide that he'd be leaving at the beginning of January as opposed to leaving in February. I'm confident that Secretary Mattis is going to be helpful as far as ensuring that there's a smooth, orderly transition over the course of decades. He has been one who's been part of smooth, orderly transitions as he's taken on one new assignment after the other. So the president made the play call here on this one, and as far as the transition goes, I think can be relatively smooth considering this is the current number 2 at the Pentagon.
Right, but as you know, General Mattis was working on the transition. So now that he's being forced out early, a month early, do you think that he is going to be at least allowed to behind the scenes help with that transition that he had started the process on?
Well, I believe that it would be helpful for Secretary Mattis in any way, shape, or form that he can be helpful to whoever his replacement is. And I think the same goes if you're talking years down the road, that a current Secretary of Defense to be able to lean on past Secretaries of Defense, even if you're able to call someone up who was a Secretary of Defense 15 years ago.
I understand
so
that, Congressman.
I think he can play a key role. I feel like he should and he will.
I understand what you're saying, but this is now a contentious situation here. Does it concern you at all, Congressman Zeldin, that according to our reporting, that President Trump called for this early departure of General Mattis because President Trump didn't like the positive press that the general has been receiving over the past few days?
Well, it's hard to comment based off of reporting from various sources where people aren't willing to put their name to it. What I will say is that James Mattis has never been one to be shy, whether he is active duty in the military, whether he's a Secretary of Defense or he's a civilian. So just because he transitions on January 1st to a civilian role, that doesn't mean he is unable to speak out and to comment. So, I think strategically it wouldn't actually make sense for me to go along with any type of assumption that this decision is one that is intended to or does in fact silence James Mattis, where he has an inability to speak out. By the way, the two-page letter that a lot of people made a big deal about, there was only like a few words of one sentence where he said that the president should have a Secretary of Defense who's more in line with his views. I agree with that sentiment, but people who are making out this two-page letter as if it's just 2 pages of criticizing the president and the administration, that's not the way I took it. And I don't believe that James Mattis, as a civilian, after his time as Secretary of Defense, is going to be a person who's going to be looking to, try to boost his Twitter following to, millions of people and become famous by monetizing his position as Secretary of Defense at the expense of and trying to overthrow this president. I just don't see that path forward for this general.
Yeah, and I understand that, and I'm not sure that was the takeaway from that. I think, the concern here or the question here to you, Congressman, and your reaction and how you see it as the House Foreign Affairs Committee, member. You've got the president now, regardless of what the reason is in terms of you don't want to base any sort of reaction based on reporting of anonymous sources. But, nonetheless, it has happened. The president has now asked General Mattis to leave a month earlier. Does that at all concern you about the way the president is handling all of this?
No, I think that as far as my understanding of General Mattis, everything I observed from him, any of the time that I've been able to spend with him, it hasn't been a lot, but it's been enough to know that this is a patriot, is someone who deeply loves our country and service to our country. And I really do believe that whether James Mattis's last day in the job is at the beginning of January or the middle of February, that he is going to do his part to be helpful with a smooth transition. And I'm confident that even if it was months down the road, if not years down the road, that James Mattis would be accessible to whoever the Secretary of Defense is at that time or whoever the President is at that time if they want to lean on him for advice. So I have no doubt that there's going to be a smooth transition at the Pentagon, especially with the fact that you're picking someone who's currently the #2, who is there now and knows all of these people who are there and the policies that are in place.
Okay. Thank you, Congressman. We're going to move on now and get to that shutdown, as President Trump said that he would own the shutdown. We're showing you now that, by the way, we just had a preview of what's to come on Fox News Sunday with Chris Wallace, acting White House Chief of Staff, incoming White House Chief of Staff. Mick Mulvaney will join Chris Wallace today at 2 p.m. and 7 p.m. Eastern Time right here on the Fox News Channel. So back to what I was saying, that President Trump said that he would own the shutdown and he'd be happy to do it. Immediately after that public meeting in the Oval Office with Speaker Pelosi, Senator Schumer, the Democratic leaders dubbed it the Trump shutdown. President Trump now calling it the Democratic shutdown. Can you explain to us how they will get to a compromise?
Well, so at that time, at that meeting, also Nancy Pelosi was saying that we didn't have the votes in the House. She convinced the members that we wouldn't be able to pass what we ended up passing, and we ended up passing it with dozens of votes as a difference between those who said yes and those who said no. Fast forward to today, you have a House-passed bill that Senator Schumer says is dead on arrival in the Senate, and that's getting a lot of attention. What's not getting enough attention is that the Senate-passed funding bill is dead on arrival in the White House. So in my mind, what that means is, regardless of your party, Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal, whether you're in the House, Senate, in the Capitol, or out, if you want to engage in this conversation, this debate, if you want to be productive, substantive, you need to talk to each other and work it out. So no one can insist on getting 100% of what they're asking for. Senator Schumer is demanding that the president abandon his call entirely for a wall. I mean, that's an unreasonable position, and the president isn't going to do that. The president, he may not get 100% of what he's looking for. What my impressions are in talking to colleagues, and I spent some time with the president this week at the White House, that there are all sorts of ways that this can be resolved where there's compromise to be found. I do not expect both parties to be negotiating against themselves, where the president, there's a number in the House-passed bill. It was $5.7 billion. You're not going to have, while the Democrats refuse to negotiate at all, Republicans to say, okay, we're good with $4 billion, we're good with $3 billion, now we're good with $2 billion, and the number keeps coming down. The Democrats need to, at this point, show a willingness to meet the president somewhere in between, getting 100% of what they want, and insisting on the president getting nothing. And by the way, the intentions here, no one's talking about building a fence on the top of the Huachuca Mountains, which are thousands of feet tall. No one's talking about building a wall in the middle of the Rio Grande. Part of our border already has a fence. Part of our border has a vulnerability that needs to get addressed. And if you care about people legally crossing, if you care about things, we've heard about the heroin and opioid abuse epidemic, drug trafficking, human trafficking, sex trafficking, if you care about all of these issues, cut through the politics, cut through the sound bites, sit down at the table, and let's fund what we need to protect our country and our border.
All right. I understand your position on that. I want to play some sound right now, Congressman, from outgoing Republican Senator Bob Corker of Tennessee. He seemed to suggest to Jake Tapper this morning on CNN that President Trump doesn't want a deal. He just wants to show that he's fighting for his campaign issue. Let's listen.
Democrats easily would support more border funding, border security. They've said that. 25 of them came to the floor and voted for something that provided $25 billion worth of border security in exchange for dealing with the Dreamers. This is something that is unnecessary. It's a spectacle. And candidly, it's juvenile. The whole thing is juvenile. I want to see real border security, and that's why I'm disappointed at where we've ended up at the end of this Congress.
Congressman, your reaction to Senator Corker?
That's nice that he's volunteering himself as Senator Schumer's spokesperson here. It'd be nice for Senator Schumer himself to be saying what Senator Corker is insisting on his behalf. The president's position is clear. His willingness to compromise is clear. My willingness to compromise is clear. Now, the president has stated in the past many times that he has a proposal that, whether we're talking about border security, we've spoken about visa lotteries, we've spoken about DACA. If you remember, the Democrats asked for a solution for what was at that time about 600,000 of the people in that dreamer population. The president came back last January and tripled that up to 1.8.
So what happened
people.
to that? Why wasn't that agreed on and just we wouldn't be here now?
Well, because the Democrats refused to say yes. If you remember back in last January, and actually and since, as we're seeing still today, is that the plank related to border security, they will not agree upon. So Republicans and the president himself, he put his neck out there. He said, you're asking for a solution for 600,000? Here's a solution for 1.8 million. Fast forward to today, I haven't heard anything contradicting that what the president was offering back in January is still on the table today. You've had votes in the House of Representatives for different bills that have fixes related to the DACA population. The Democrats take over at the beginning of January. They could put something on the floor, but you have to understand this. There are some people in Congress who are insisting on only doing something for the Dreamers. There are some people in Congress who are insisting only doing something for building a wall. And I understand you need to get to 60 votes. So let's talk together. Let's compromise. The time right now could be right like it was last January. But Senator Corker, speaking on behalf of Senator Schumer, we need to get back to the reality that Senator Schumer has said multiple times on the floor over the last few days and to the cameras in public that the president needs to totally, completely abandon any ask whatsoever for $1 for the wall. He needs to come off that publicly.
Thank you very much, and perhaps we'll see if there could be clean bills, and then they can vote on each separately. We'll see. I don't know. Congressman Lee Zeldin, thank you for joining us. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas to you and your family.
Same to you. Happy New Year.
Thank you.
The search is on for survivors after a tsunami struck without warning on two of Indonesia's most populated islands, killing at least 222 people and leaving hundreds more injured. A look at the aftermath and a live report. Plus, new reaction from lawmakers as a partial government shutdown is expected to extend beyond Christmas over border security money. Also, more on the breaking news. President Trump saying he has named Deputy Defense Patrick Shanahan to assume the title of Acting Defense Secretary January 1st.
A Fox News alert, at least 222 people were killed and hundreds more injured after a volcanic eruption triggered a tsunami in Indonesia. The massive waves striking last night without any warning, hitting several popular tourist destinations, and now President Trump offering his condolences on Twitter for those impacted by the natural disaster. Jeff Paul is live from our Los Angeles bureau with more. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Arthel. The number of dead in the hundreds, but the death toll only likely to rise. Several still missing, and rescue teams say there are areas of devastation they haven't physically been able to reach yet.
I was sleeping. It hit us at the same time when my son closed the hotel door. I didn't know what was hitting me. My hand is so hurt. I also got some minor wounds, but my husband suffered a broken leg.
That's just one of the more than 800 survivors who were injured in the tsunami that hit last night during a busy holiday weekend. The massive waves, some as high as 65 feet, crashed ashore, carrying away hotels, houses by the hundreds, and crowds of people, including many who were on the beach at a concert. Scientists say the tsunami was likely caused by undersea landslides or by those happening above sea level on the outside slope of the Anak Krakatau volcano after it erupted. Geologists believe the volcano erupted. Then 24 minutes later, there was a tsunami, giving anyone on the island not much of a chance to get to safety.
There was very little warning. It would have only taken about 10 minutes for the tsunami to hit the coast to the west. It took about an hour to hit it to the east, but even so, there's still very little time to get a warning out. And there are no buoys in this particular area for early warnings.
The Indonesian military is on the ground joining search teams as they continue looking for survivors, but the number of dead is expected to only get worse. Art Val.
So sad. Jeff Paul, thank you. And we're going to have much more on this later this hour with volcanologist Dr. Michael Rapino. Mike?
Straight ahead, we'll get reaction to the naming of a new acting Secretary of Defense. The president wants him on the job January 1st, weeks before Jim Mattis was officially scheduled to leave the administration. Also, the partial government shutdown is underway with the impasse over border wall funding. So who's responsible for the shutdown depends on who you ask. Up next, we'll have reaction from lawmakers from both sides of the aisle as the shutdown enters day 2. Breaking developments out of the White House concerning the next leader of the Pentagon as President Trump names Deputy Defense Secretary Patrick Shanahan to become acting Defense Secretary come January 1st. This announcement after Defense Secretary James Mattis resigned from his post, but was expected to remain until late February. Let's bring in Christian Whiten, former State Department senior advisor under President Trump and President George W. Bush. Christian, great to have you.
Good to be here. Thanks.
So what about the breaking news, this change at the Pentagon coming January 1st?
It's a good move by Trump. It was a mistake to potentially keep Mattis around for 2 months after he already basically said he's not on board with the president's foreign policy, with his defense policy. The president has made it declare victory accurately, I think, and pull out of Syria. I think he's going to draw down on Afghanistan probably and hopefully ship some of those resources and forces to the Pacific where they can deter China. That's not good for Mattis. Mattis was brought on largely that having a SecDef hang around for 2 months while he's not on board was a mistake. So I think it's good to at least get an acting person in shape and hopefully a nominee for a permanent Secretary of Defense soon.
My sense is some will argue, what about the orderly transfer of power? Is there any merit to that?
No, I don't think so. Shanahan has been over there. He's not from as much of a warrior background, if you will. He comes from Boeing. He spent a career at Boeing. I think it made sense. Mattis was the warrior, if you will, and Shanahan was the manager, especially trying to turn around the complete disaster that is Pentagon procurement. As far as running the building, I think he's capable of doing that. And of course, we still have our combatant out in the field running operations.
Big picture, what's the impact of the departures of Secretary Mattis at the Pentagon and Brett McGurk from his post battling ISIS?
You know, it's a chance for the president, I think, to do better with personnel. He has served, I think, is a perfect example. He's a holdover not just from Obama, but from Bush, and he was at the heart of most of the failures in the Middle East. He was in the coalition provisional authority in Iraq, so you had this great military victory followed by a grotesquely competent administration and occupation of Iraq. He was there when ISIS came back. Lots of Syrians got to the outskirts of Baghdad, and he was kept in his position by the new secretaries of state. You know, Mattis, he was good at killing ISIS, but he was very bad politically. He pocketed the large increase in defense spending that Trump was able to achieve, but you've seen no increase in forces in the Pacific or things that would deter the Chinese. So I think this is a chance, frankly, to take some of these positions in a more political direction, and also people who can explain policies, Trump policies, to Congress and the American people to win more public support.
Do you worry ISIS is going to make a comeback with the departure of U.S. troops?
ISIS as a force that can govern territory and as an organized military force is kaput. There will always be jihadists, or at least I think for the rest of our lives, in places like Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq. If we have to go back to control them, then we can do that. But we've got to start freeing up some of these resources. You know, we're going to have people in Afghanistan fighting who weren't born on 9/11, but, you know, whose fathers and mothers fought in Afghanistan in the very same war. We spend $50 billion on these conflicts a year, more or less, and that's money that we could be used elsewhere to rebuilding our Navy and Air Force and deterring China.
Christian, what about the Kurds? There's some concern they're going to be slaughtered without the U.S. keeping an eye on things.
You know, I think we still have a relationship there, a liaison relationship. Of course, we've been a lifelines in Iraq. I think there are, linkages between those Kurds and the Kurds in Syria. Again, withdrawing our troops doesn't mean a complete evacuation or an end of our contact and support for these groups. I think the president would probably be very willing to sell arms or provide arms and what is necessary. But we should also be mindful that continuing the Syrian civil war has a deep humanitarian cost. This has killed several 100,000 people. Assad, even though he is evil and even though he is not our friend, has unfortunately won much of Syria. And bringing an end to that conflict, giving him an avenue that doesn't necessarily run through Tehran or Moscow, frankly, reaching out to him, political solution would be, I think, better than just keeping forces in Syria.
Speaking of that, what do you think the reaction is in Tehran and Moscow to the U.S. withdrawal?
Yeah, I think it's less. Of course, Trump's opponents have said they're happy. I don't think that's true because now Assad, Putin, and the Iranians have to worry about any remnant jihadist forces that are there. We were largely clearing them out, and then the expectation was that Assad would come in, and I think his expectation was that he would take over the places that we had pacified or that our allies pacified. So now he gets to worry about those groups.
Back to the breaking news of the hour. So you're not anticipating any turbulence at the Pentagon with this shakeup come January 1st?
We do have a real problem with generals who do not know how to end wars, and they're being risk averse. I understand you never want to declare victory since, you're going to have jihadists in the Middle East and these groups are going to pop back up. And you may have some more resignations, but I think that's fine because the president deserves to have people who support his foreign policy. This is not a surprise he sprung on the American people. Donald Trump has been saying these things and articulating his foreign policy for years, going to a year before the election, put before the American people. So I wouldn't surprise me if you see some more departures. And when you have even though Mattis really didn't bring in a strong political team, when one secretary goes, you always have some churn, especially in communications and other parts, the more political parts of the department.
Christian Whiten, thanks very much.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Marthel?
Mike, the partial government shutdown continues with the battle over border wall funding being the main sticking point between President Trump and Democrats. House members from both sides of the aisle are divided as well.
The primary reason that we have a federal government is to provide for the common defense. And part of that is securing the sovereignty and integrity of our territorial borders. I think we need to take it as far as we can until we don't control the House anymore. So I support the president with respect to this.
Democrats support border security. We appropriated in the last 2 years $1.6 billion for border security, and Democrats support that. We just think it should be done in a smart way. Use technology, use sensors, use drones, use more personnel, use it in a way that's effective.
Doug McKelway joins us live from Washington with more reaction from inside the Beltway. Hi, Doug.
Hi, Arthel. The Capitol building is quiet today inside the Beltway. Members have departed for the holidays with no resolution in sight to the border wall fight or government shutdown blame game. It fell apart Saturday with the president inviting many Republican immigration hardliners to the White House for lunch. They came away convinced that the president will not relent on his long-stated promise to build the wall.
What we really came away focused on is how important it is to build this border wall, and the president is committed to that. And I think he came in, he came in locked in, he came out locked in, and the reality is, this is a national security issue. It's a humanitarian issue.
The immovable object against Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer's irresistible force. Here he is.
It will never pass the Senate. Not today, not next week, not next year. So, Mr. President, President Trump, if you want to open the government, you must abandon the wall. Plain and simple.
Adding to the impasse, Schumer is conferring closely with Nancy Pelosi, who, in her quest to win the House speakership in January, must protect her left flank and appease the new class of far-left Democrats to be sworn in.
This is not about a number. This is about the Democrats not wanting the president to actually follow through on his commitment to secure that southern border.
Congress is now set to return on December 27th, but there is a growing school of thought the impasse may continue into the new Congress, at which point Pelosi, assuming she wins that speakership, will face a baptism by fire, sharing the blame for the shutdown with Schumer and with President Trump. Arthel, back to you.
All right. Thank you, Doug McKelway.
As the partial government shutdown continues, how will this all play out, if at all, with the 2020 presidential campaign? Joining to analyze is Robert Donachie, White House correspondent for the Washington Examiner. Robert, good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
So we've got a whole lot of Democrats in the Senate and perhaps a few in the House that would like to run for president starting any moment now. How do you expect them to respond to this standoff?
So I think President Donald Trump is showing here that this is a make it or break it moment for his presidency. He campaigned on immigration, he campaigned on building a border wall, and what he doesn't want is a read my lips, no new taxes moment. So by shutting down the government here, he's trying to show to Republicans and to his base and to voters particularly that he is exhausting all options in terms of getting funding for that border wall. Now, House Republicans came through and they delivered on that promise earlier this week. I think Senate Republicans have to figure out how they're going to do that or face backlash here in 2020. Democrats, Republicans and Trump can claim a win here, I think. And I think on the other hand, Democrats can claim a win, particularly, Schumer, because he is, for now at least, thwarted the $5 billion funding, and he's showing that, he's sticking his thumb in Trump's eye. And just as he said on the floor a couple days ago, President Trump, you're not getting your border wall funding tomorrow, you're not getting it next week, and you're not getting it when House Democrats seat in the next Congress. So, in terms of 2020 here, I think President Trump has set himself up to at least say, hey, look, I tried, I fought, I've done this, House Republicans back me up, I want Senate Republicans to back me up, and I want to get this done. Democrats are also showing that, hey, look, we are against what the president's immigration policy here is. Right. We are against what he's doing. And, I think that coming in here in terms of, maybe like Beto O'Rourke or somebody else, we're going to have to see who comes out in the front runner. But right now, I think the president has stood strong, and I think he didn't balk, and I think that's going to play out well for him in 2020.
I don't want to minimize the impact on the government workers furloughed at Christmas. They will get their back pay, I'm sure, but I'm sure it's not fun. But for the president, how critical is this battle in terms of 2020?
Well, exactly like I just said, right? In 1988, at the Republican convention, late President George H.W. Bush said, read my lips, no new taxes. He ended up raising taxes, and that's one of the large reasons he lost in that race. And I think, the president realizes this, that he can't back down from the border wall. And even, a week and a half ago or so, us in Washington, we're watching him and we're a little worried, and strategy-wise, is he going to back down and is he going to do this? He's done it a few times in his presidency, but I think he also realizes that, my base could possibly turn against me. And I think he's trying to stick here, and he's trying to make sure that his rhetoric is strong. And most of this government shutdown, too, is a kind of a rhetorical exercise. It's less than 20% of government workers are going to go without pay. They will get back pay. It's happened every time that a government's shut down. Right. And so, we're kind of having, like a back and forth and tossing the political football a little bit.
Was President Trump saying he'd own the shutdown in that feisty Oval Office meeting with leaders Schumer and Pelosi an unforced error?
Right. No, I don't think so. I think his base likes to see him fight. I think his base really loved that exchange between him and Schumer and Pelosi. And you know what? If government shutdowns and owning them were really that big of a problem, then Schumer and actually Democrats in general last January when they shut down the government would have had a heck of a time in the 2018 midterms. And Republicans only picked up 2 or 3 seats in the Senate, so it didn't, actually hurt them all that much. And if you look back in terms of, when it happened in Clinton and Bush's presidency and other things like that, I think voters like to see the fight. Voters like to see what, their politicians doing what they said they would do. And that's what Trump did in that Oval Office meeting, and that's what he's doing right now.
If the partial shutdown continues until January 3rd, when Nancy Pelosi is likely to become the next speaker, does that energize Democrats heading into 2020 if they've stood their ground?
Yeah, I think the bigger question here, I think that Democrats are going to be energized over is the investigations that Democrats are going to launch once they take office. And they also, Republicans in the House aren't going to be able to get the border wall funding that they want, and Democrats know that. And so I think they can claim a win here on January 3rd if nothing is done, and obviously Senate's going home. So it doesn't look at this point like Trump's going to get his border wall funding this go around.
Robert Donachie of the Washington Examiner, thanks so much. Arthel?
Thanks for having me.
A deadly tsunami strikes Indonesia without warning, killing at least 222 people. What triggered this tragedy during holiday celebrations and whether a disaster like this can be avoided? A volcanologist joins us next. Plus, it is a holiday travel season already happening and in the record books. But if you're on the move, could the weather dampen your plans? And who might see a white Christmas? Look at that cute doggy. Straight ahead, your forecast. Fox News alert, at least 222 people were killed and hundreds more injured after a tsunami struck two of Indonesia's most populated islands last night. The disaster set off by an underwater landslide that was triggered by a volcanic eruption. Let's bring in Dr. Michael Rampino, a volcanologist and associate professor of biology and environmental studies at NYU. Dr. Rampino, thank you for joining us.
Great to be here.
And an undersea landslide that is set off by the undersea volcano.
Yes.
So does an undersea volcano erupt like normal volcanoes that we're able to see, spewing lava?
This volcano is actually above the water. You can see it's an island.
Okay.
Yeah. But they think that the eruption may have been under the water.
I see.
And that somehow destabilized things and triggered an undersea landslide. And then, of course, that generates a wave.
I see. So because you've got like, what, 17,000 islands there in that area?
Loads of volcanoes.
In the Ring of Fire.
Indonesia has more volcanoes than any other country.
So that's why it's happening there?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
So it's not surprising?
Not surprising at all. These things happen from time to time.
But is it different, though, Doctor, that this is happening caused by a landslide and not your normal? Usually you hear there's an earthquake,
yes,
the shifting of the tectonic plates, yes, and then you have the tsunami. But
well, very often the earthquake will set off a landslide, and that displaces the water, and that sends the wave. This time, there may have been a small earthquake, but they got very little warning. The volcanic island is very close to the coast of Java, and so there would be hardly any warning at all.
Okay, so again, explain to me what an undersea landslide is.
Well, you have sediment that builds up under the water, and it could become unstable, piles up. And so eventually, if you have something that shakes it, like a small earthquake or a volcanic eruption, that material will slide down the slope, and that will generate a wave that then moves onto the shore.
So in this case, you're explaining to me that there was an eruption, but it was a deep eruption.
Yes.
So even though part of the volcano is above water, there wasn't lava spewing, perhaps?
Not at this time, no. But that volcano isn't generally erupting from time to time. It's an active volcano.
And I understand it's been erupting frequently in the past recent weeks, right?
Yes. I was there a couple of years ago, and we watched the eruptions go on. But there was a very big eruption back in 1883 of the same volcano, which generated a tsunami, which killed 36,000 people.
And this time, which is horrible.
Yes.
It's such a tragic incident here. And then asking, normally there is a bit of a warning, a tsunami warning, but there was nothing here because of the way this happened.
Yes.
Is this likely to happen again without warning?
Yes, yeah. These things will happen from time to time, and they're very hard to predict. And you'll get almost no warning because the volcano is very close to the coast, and so you have a few minutes warning, maybe at most. Won't help very much.
And what's the likelihood of this happening again anytime soon?
In the same place?
Yeah.
It could happen again at any time. They're very hard to predict. Volcanic eruptions and earthquakes are extremely difficult to predict.
So what do the folks do there? I mean, is there any way that perhaps you can possibly devise a device, a way to predict these undersea volcano eruptions?
It's very, very difficult, and they wouldn't get very much warning, just a few minutes. And that wouldn't be enough time to get out of the way of the tsunami.
Wow. So, I mean, I don't know. Have I asked you all the right questions? Would you like to say something else?
There's not much you can do about it if the volcano is so close to the coast. It sets off a landslide and sets off